Hello, this is Steven now, and we are here with the top 10 video. Today, I'll be doing my top 10 comic book movies. Now, as you know, I'm a huge superhero fan. I'm into the comic book scene. And comic book films have very much been adapted into some of the biggest films of all time, many of whom starting major successful franchises. It's a bit of an interesting journey to how that happened, as a lot of comic book films at first were not considered, that worth their time. But next thing you know, they get adapted and they become big, humongous successes. So here I'll be doing my top 10 comic book films. Now keep in mind, this is all a personal opinion. These are films I like, and I'm going to try and at least be diverse and make it that I at least do, include films from either other franchises, from DC to Marvel to, and hopefully maybe some other films that are from, like, say, other films that aren't necessarily owned by the big two. Anyway, with that out of the way, let's get straight into this list. Coming in at number 10 is X-Men 2. Now, interesting, even though X-Men is from Marvel, a lot of their film franchise weren't under the same Marvel Cinematic Universe. In fact, it was kind of its own thing, but now the X-Men films are now being a part of, are going to be like new characters to be part of the MCU. For those who don't know anything about X-Men, basically, the X-Men are a group of superpowered beings. They are called mutants because they are born with these abilities, essentially. And the X-Men are basically a superhero team formed by Charles Xavier, aka Professor X. And basically, they battle, rogue mutants and fight crime. That is essentially them. They, of course, have famously have their, arguably most infamous member of the X-Men and beloved Marvel character, Wolverine, who is, of course, portrayed in the film series by, of course, Hugh Jackman. And basically, even though it is a fantasy thing, it also delves into politics, as essentially the X-Men rivals, like the whole mutants, are kind of like are kind of perceived as beneath, and it's kind of like a political thing, and this especially was in the first one. The second one is a bit especially in the first film. The second film, which is on my list, it more revolves around with most of a group of military guys break into the X-Men's hideout, and as a result, the mutant kids who are part of this school that essentially Xavier opens to mutant kids to come and, hone their skills so they can be a part of society, are all kidnapped, with a very few X-Men on the run trying to track down what's going on. So it kind of is like that. X-Men 2 is often considered the best of the series. Of course, there are others, but I've always loved this because of, it's such a, I don't know, it feels like it's just shaking something up that we haven't seen before, and it's doing it something very early on in the film franchise. Another thing I also love about it is it gets to explore a bit of Wolverine's origin. You see, majority of the time, Wolverine's origin has always been a mystery to him, or he's had amnesia about it, so he doesn't know necessarily his origin himself. So they kind of do explore that and go into that, especially in this film. Overall, it's at number 10, purely based because, honestly, again, X-Men, not really my thing, but I do enjoy it nonetheless. I do love a lot of the, character designs, and a lot of the characters, especially, like Storm, Rogue, Nightcrawler, Mystique, everyone loves Mystique, and of course, Professor X and Magneto. Great characters, and very sympathetic, especially Magneto as the villain, very sympathetic. Overall, give this one a watch. It is definitely the best X-Men film, and I'd say, and definitely, film definitely worth watching. If you haven't seen it, give it a watch. Number 9 goes to Spider-Man No Way Home. Now, Spider-Man was introduced in the Phase 3, I believe, of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So Spider-Man has numerous film adaptations on the big screen. There was, of course, the famous Sam Raimi trilogy. There is, of course, the Amazing Spider-Man 2 films. But then, of course, there's the MCU films. And I knew I was going to include a Spider-Man film on this list. I just love Spider-Man as a character. And, of course, I just love Spider-Man No Way Home. Me and my brother saw this in the theaters up near Mount Isa. And we just love this film. Following essentially the backlash, or not backlash, but the events of the second Spider-Man MCU film, Spider-Man is essentially, he's been outed, and as, Peter Parker's been outed as Spider-Man. He is essentially trying to adjust with that, but it's not working. He then goes to Doctor Strange to essentially have him erase the memory around the world, the memory of Spider-Man, Peter being Spider-Man, but he does ask during the spell to have some people remember. This, of course, doesn't go so well, as what has happened opens the portal to other multi-universes with, to have some of his big rogues gallery coming. Villains that this version of Spider-Man hasn't encountered before, and it is villains who are portrayed by fan-favorite actors from previous Spider-Man films. From the Sam Raimi trilogy, you got the Green Goblin, Doc Ock, Dr. Octopus, and Sandman. From the Amazing Spider-Man films, you got the Lizard, and of course Electro. And essentially you have to deal with these new guests who have come. But also in that, this film is probably best famous for the fact that this version of Spider-Man, portrayed by Tom Holland, who many people consider the best Spider-Man, and I agree, he is definitely the best, if not one of the best, and he has to team up with, essentially, the other two actors who have played Spider-Man over the years, from the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man from the Sam Raimi trilogy, and of course Andrew Garfield from the Amazing Spider-Man films. And that is probably the best bit about the film, the treat of having these three be on screen together. We see what makes the Spider-Mans different and unique. We also poke at some of their flaws. But what I also like about this film, it further, what I love about the MCU films with Spider-Man in general, they help progress and further his character. And, and by the end of this film, which has a very tragedy, I highly recommend you watch it, further progresses his character, and essentially he kind of has grown up. This trilogy of films has Peter's Spider-Man essentially grow up to, become the Spider-Man well known from the comics. It takes a different route, of course, but it is still great that the route they take. And of course, we've got a new trilogy of films with hints of introducing Miles Morales as Spider-Man into these films. I can't wait to see if they do go in that direction, because I would love to see it. And of course, we get a few cameos here. We get J. Jonah Jameson, once again portrayed by J.K. Simmons. And of course, we've got Daredevil, or Matt Murdock, I should say, have a cameo. Still portrayed by Charlie Fox from the Daredevil Netflix TV show, though of course it's now coming back, so I can't wait to have a look at that show when it finally airs, or if it airs. But anyway, out of all the Spider-Man films, this is my favorite. Again, and another one I highly recommend you watch, or one of my favorite Spider-Man films. This is just such a good one, because this film is a fan service film, but it's done right. I highly recommend you give this one a watch. Number 8, Deadpool. Oh my god. Another character from the X-Men film series, portrayed by Ryan Reynolds. Oh my god. Deadpool, the merc with the mouth, is arguably one of the greatest superheroes, because he's constantly breaking the fourth wall. Very much an anti-hero. He too is a mutant. What I love this film, it's pure comedy, but it doesn't hold back from the violence. I love how the character pokes fun of the Deadpool's early appearance in the X-Men series, but also at the same time the actor pokes fun of other superheroes that he's played. Overall, this is just pure comedy, and it's a very good comedy. Now these days with superhero films, you can take very much good creative risks, in my opinion, and this definitely took a huge risk. It is one of the first R-rated superhero films. I highly recommend you go and definitely give this one a watch, especially for the performance of Deadpool. Everyone who's watched this has completely fallen in love with this character, me being one of them. This is one of the few comic book films that is clearly not made for a family audience, like maybe X-Men or the Spider-Man film that we've just looked at. This film as a whole is purely made for adults who are into a little bit of dark comedy, but at the same time, even though it is but I'd say it's more of a dark comedy, or with dark humor, I should say. But despite that, they do flesh out Deadpool's character far better in here than in past. Of course, this film's had a sequel, and I'm sure many people love that film, and I've watched it too, but for me, the original is just the better one because it's just an all-fun ride. And what makes this film work is Ryan Reynolds' performance. If someone else played Deadpool, I don't think this film would have worked. But because they got the right man to play it, and they just let him loose, you got a fantastic superhero character. And again, this is another one I highly recommend you go and watch. Number 7, The Avengers. Oh my god. This is perhaps one of the first superhero teams to be in live action. Maybe people say Fantastic Four might be. But for me, this was just a film in the making. I can remember when we were seeing the first 4 films in the MCU. Iron Man, Thor, Hulk, Captain America. Those 4 films were leading up to this. And it is a massive crossover with all these films coming together for the Avengers to be created. The premise of the film is essentially Loki, the villain from Thor, has come to Earth once again and is a master plan to create havoc. These characters we have seen in the past are forced to come together and create the Avengers. That is the premise. This film was just a huge box office success. It's considered one of the greatest superhero films. In fact, for the longest time, it was considered the greatest. Not my personal favorite film. Why? Well, honestly, I'm not really that fond of the huge overall spectacular. I prefer my superheroes to be a little bit more grounded, down to earth. But despite that, my god, was this film great to see. It balanced action that you've never seen before. It definitely balances comedy and very much serious moments. I love how it can balance that, but it was up in the ante with what we've seen before. Everyone here does fantastic. Chris Evans as Captain America, Scarlett Johansson as Black Widow, Robert Downey Jr. as Iron Man. Arguably, he's one of my favorite characters in this film, alongside Captain America. Those two are just great. Hulk is, as it was recast here, and I think the recast definitely worked a lot better. Hawkeye and Thor, I was not really that huge, especially around Thor. I was not really that into Thor, to be all honest, despite the fact I absolutely love Chris Hemsworth's, performance. I'm just not a huge fan of Thor, but I loved Hawkeye. I thought it was very underused. But thank God Hawkeye is getting more recognition in the MCU, especially with his own TV show that he had a while back. I just love that Hawkeye is a character that's getting further explored. This film is a superhero masterpiece, and it really just showed that this was a huge risk. They stepped the ante up, and everyone enjoyed it. This was a really great film. And I think it's one of the first superhero team films, to be majorly successful, which of course was why the MCU had to try and adapt. Justice League had to do their thing. But what didn't work with them was they rushed it. MCU builds it over time. They think of the long run and the build-up, and it works so much in this one. Number 8. I should say number 6. Sorry, not number 8. But number 6 is Captain America, The Winter Soldier. My favorite Captain America film by a long shot. I loved Captain America, the first Avenger. I thought that was a great introduction. And people loved Captain America Civil War. But honestly, that should have just been an Avengers film. But for me, Captain America Winter Soldier is for me the better Captain America film. First off, I feel that his fighting style became far better in this installment compared to previous. Also, I love how this is focusing on Cap adapting to the modern world. You see, Captain America's origin, he was a person who just wanted to fight in World War II. He wanted to serve his country. But he, wasn't physically fit enough. So he volunteered to be part of a military experiments, the super soldier serum, and became Captain America. Even though it made him super buff, agility, and powers and all that, what makes him great is his ideology. He is not his, patriotism, but also, like, he believes, the things he will fight for what he believes in. This especially is, like, he's adapting to the modern world. First, it's a bit of a gimmick because he has to because he's pretty much an old man, a man out of time. But at the same time, there's just some things he just don't agree with. Even though it's called progress, he doesn't see it that way. Like, with these armies of helicarriers meant to protect the world, for him, he doesn't see it that way. He sees it, he doesn't see it as freedom. He sees it as fear. But most importantly, this is pretty much Cap not just adapting to that, but he finds out that Hydra, that he thought he defeated all the way back in World War II, is still around. They're just more covert. And he has to go up against the Winter Soldier, like their top assassin. And to his shock, it is, of course, Bucky Barnes. But I'm not spoiling, everyone knows. And it's basically Winter Soldier is his old friend. I love how, this went. It further explored his character. I also love how they introduced Falcon here, who is a great character, and essentially comes Captain America's new partner, as it were, and a future new member of the Avengers. Overall, I think what I love about this is, again, it's a story that's focusing more around Cap being adapted to the new world and how he views it, and I just love that type of storyline. And there's any characters that are introduced in this film would have a huge important roles later on in the MCU. So if you think about it, this film definitely introduced that, and it's definitely worth watching because I think this is a crucial film that definitely affected the MCU going forward. Give this one a watch. Now, let's get into the top 5. At number 5 comes Spider-Man Homecoming. I mentioned before there was the other MCU Spider-Man film I've placed on this list. I need to recant something I said when I said it's my favorite Spider-Man film. I want to say I think it is the best Spider-Man film. But my favorite Spider-Man film goes to this. What I love about it is, now Spider-Man was introduced in Captain America Civil War, how they introduced him into the MCU. This focuses solely on Spider-Man. How is he? First off, what I love about what they've done here, they've done in all other Spider-Man films prior, is, first off, Spider-Man's in high school. But they also show that him being in high school is just as much as a challenge as him being Spider-Man. You gotta understand, Spider-Man has to balance both worlds, and he's in high school, arguably at the toughest point in your life. Tom Holland, for me, just looks like the character just came off the big screen. Now, even though that is the case, he's definitely not 100% comic accurate. For the original trilogy, he doesn't really make his own suits. It's kind of made for him. True, he can, sometimes adapt with, the stuff he's given to create his own suits, and that is fine. But I do give him a bit of a cheat sheet. It's also him stepping up, and him trying to prove himself. It's also worth noting is Tom Holland, for me, I could buy this kid as a teenager. Something back with Andrew Garfield in the role, or Tobey Maguire in the role. My problem is, I never bought them as teenagers. I never bought that. I also appreciate that, again, they do balance one thing. How he's in the Spider-Man world and the superhero world. He's trying to balance both. Iron Man plays a bit of a parental figure. What I love about, him, of Iron Man and Spider-Man's relationship is Iron Man comes off as a bit of a mentor figure. And of course, there's the villain of the piece. Now, in other films, the villains are all great and provide a challenge in a way. But the Vulture, for me, is just so great. Vulture is a classic Spider-Man villain, and he's portrayed by Michael Keaton, who of course played Batman way back in Batman 1989. But for me, he's just such a different character. True, he becomes a gun runner, well, a high-tech weapons runner, I would say. But he does this to support his family. He used to be a construction worker, but it all fell apart. Majority of the villains in the MCU films do, especially the first two, have a connection, somewhat of a connection, to Iron Man, or want to steal his tech. The Vulture does still stay true to that, but it's done. But I love how he's very a sympathetic character. He's just trying to support his family, and I do like how, you know, it's because Spider-Man's a young kid, but the Vulture is an old man. So I do love that the heroes are very much a contrast and similar. Again, I also love the supporting cast. Ned is fantastic. I was a little upset they weren't going to use Harry, but seeing what Ned is, I'm grateful that we did. The female love interest in this film is not different, but I've realized at the end that she's not to be the main love interest for the rest of this trilogy. It is their reinterpretation of NJ by the end of the film, and again, she is great, especially in the sequels. I absolutely love it. Overall, what I love about this is, you know, it gets to the core of Spider-Man. They adapt him into this new MCU they're doing, but they still stay relatively true to the core of the character. And again, what I love about it is you can tell the little references or the little homages to, I would say, past Spider-Man, both in the other films and even comics. I absolutely loved, and I thought they did an absolutely terrific job in adapting this version of Spider-Man. Number 4. Batman, released in 1989. Of course I was going to have some Batman films on this list. Hell, I literally did a whole, like, Batman, the old Adam West 66 show. Overall, in the top 10 videos on my favorite Batman villains and other types of Batman related videos. Overall, what can I say about this film that really hasn't been said? This is the film that made studios take comic book films seriously. This is the film that made Batman Dark Knight again. The film basically revolves around Batman going up against the Joker. A classic setup, but works. Director Tim Burton at the helm certainly made this film the reason it is such a mega hit as it was. The dark gothic atmosphere that you could tell Tim Burton was a huge influence. You could tell he definitely adapted the comic, but also classic film noir. And it worked. Michael Keaton as Batman, to many, he is the definitive Batman to many people, which is interesting to know, not because he played the Vulture, which obviously was our number 5, but the fact that when he was cast, people hated the idea. But after they saw the trailer and the film, it won audiences over, especially hardcore fans. Jack Nicholson as the Joker set the benchmark for villains to come, both in the Batman Rogues Gallery, other Rogues Galleries in general, and of course other interpretations of the Joker that followed. However, if there's any gripe I could have with this film, is I'd say the romance. I never found that to be really interesting. And it's not saying I don't like the romances. Hell, I felt that they worked well in the Spider-Man and other superhero films, but I never felt it really worked here. Just personal taste, I guess. Overall, this film has a legacy that will stand the test of time. And to many, it is one of the greatest superhero films, but it's also considered one of the greatest Batman films. And for a long time it was, until one eclipsed its wings, which reminds me, at number 3 goes to The Dark Knight. Oh my god, this film broke box office records and critical acclaim. You see, The Dark Knight is part of the Christopher Nolan Dark Knight trilogy, which essentially was an attempt at a reboot in the Batman film series. After these, what Batman was in I think it was 97, the film franchise was on hiatus until it came back in 2006 with Batman Begins. And Nolan's approach was adapt the comics to the real world. And as a result, this is what you get. The film was a decent success, but then came its sequel, the film we're talking about, and boy did it explode. It adapted The Long Halloween, and essentially it just felt like Gotham was getting worse. And of course, this is especially since with its villain. The premise of the film is basically Batman, Gordon, and Harvey Dent form an alliance essentially to take down the rest of Gotham's criminal underworld and actually bring some change to the city. But whilst that's happening, a new threat has emerged to cause chaos and mayhem, that being the Joker, betrayed by the tragic passing, the late great Heath Ledger. His portrayal of the Joker is one of the few comic book characters to win an Oscar. And it is so. For many, Heath Ledger's take on the Joker is considered to be one of the most definitive and set the benchmark for many to follow, just like Jack Nicholson. I remember when Heath Ledger was cast, there was a lot of skepticism because many people still saw him as this heartthrob. Some, of course, said don't. He is good because he has done some very creative films. Overall, this was definitely in the public eye and I would say the consciousness for quite a long time. Then the film came out. And, of course, unfortunately, Heath Ledger passed before he could see the final product. But overall, this film was just great. I love how everyone is giving their great performances here. Aaron Eckhart as Two-Face, very underrated, even though it didn't get much screen time. Christian Bale's Batman is often teased about mostly because of the voice, but I absolutely love what his take, like what he brought to the character. True, there's some not really good things, especially the voice is often mimicked, but for the majority part, I thought he was a real badass. Overall, this film was one of the first comic book films ever to get over $1 billion. The next thing to surpass that, of course, would be the Avengers would be the next film to surpass that. Overall, this was the benchmark of showing you can, if you take superhero films seriously, they can become massive successes. And this was one of them. That's what I love about it. I love how it's, it stays more, and I also love the approach they went with it, of being a superhero film that stays more close to reality or down to the ground compared to being out there. And that's what I love about it. But of course, and for a while, this was my favorite Batman film. But there was one, ladies and gentlemen, that surpassed it. And that is, of course, the number 2 spot goes to The Batman. When I saw this film, I loved it. I still do. When I get a chance to watch it, I watch it. What I love about it is this film feels like a passion piece. Matt Reeves has directed this film. The premise in this film is the Batman is up against a serial killer Zodiac-type criminal known as the Riddler. But whilst he's doing so, he uncovers Gotham's corruption and encounters some people that will become essentially 2 villains, or if you could say one is a villain, encounters them that will be essentially a benchmark for the rest of his crime-fighting career. This film does something different. In Batman 89, Batman's a myth. We don't know how long he's been on the job, but he's a myth. In The Dark Knight, he is very well known by this point. Well known because of the events of the first one. In this one, it's established that Batman is only 2 years into this, but he's still a bit of a rookie. And that's what I love about it. It's a Batman who's both experienced, but also a rookie. Now, Robert Pattinson was cast as Batman, and I'll be honest, when I heard of that casting, I was skeptical. Because, again, like many people, you have the image of Twilight in your head. But at the same time, I was willing to give him a shot, because I remember him for having a small role in Harry Potter, and I thought, well, you know what, let's give him an opportunity, see what he brings to the table. And boy, did he deliver. What I love about this Batman film, it barely even feels like a comic book film. In fact, it feels more like a crime drama. This film adapts the comics, and of course, the characters from the comics are, once again, reinterpreted differently. They are not really comic book villains. Instead, in this film, the characters feel more like they were influenced by real people or real things. You see, the Christopher Nolan trilogy adapted Batman to be what would these characters be if they were in real life. This one is what would these characters what happens if you adapt the comic book world and real life and merge them together and have characters be influenced by either real life people or fictional people. As a result, the Riddler here this time around is, in my opinion, one of the scariest Batman villains. I say he's probably the best Batman villain on screen. He stays true to the source material, but he's been adapted differently. I say this is a great performance. It outdoes Heath Ledger's take. And that's something I would never say. But, of course, one of my favorite bits was, of course, the Penguin. As I stated, the Penguin is my favorite Batman villain of all time. So I was really skeptical or intrigued what were they going to do with this character. And when I saw it in the film, now, the first scene, I was a little bit like, oh, so Penguin's going to be portrayed more like an traditional Italian mobster? I was trying to process it, but the next scene that followed won me over with that, where Batman's interrogating him in his actual nightclub. And that for me won me over. And I fell in love with Colin Farrell's Penguin. And I'm very more excited with the fact it's going to get his own TV show. What I love about this, for me, this film understands Batman's world and is opening it up to show just how of a bad, crime-filled place this is. You can tell they're adapting the Long Halloween in this film. But at the same time, they are opening the doors to try new things. And for the most part, I think it succeeds. This film is, for many, is considered one of the greatest Batman films. Already, out of the gate, it won fans over. And it certainly won me over. I can't wait to see the next films in these Batman films. And for a moment, I was considering on giving this the #1 spot. But there is just one superhero film that just outdid it. And that, of course, at #1 is Avengers Endgame. Oh my god, this film was just spectacular. Basically, at the events of Avengers, well, Infinity Wars, what's left of the superheroes have to come together to take Thanos down one last time. This film says goodbye to a lot of its MCU characters, or two of its main MCU characters, Iron Man and Captain America. For me, Robert Downey Jr. gives the best performance of Iron Man there ever was and ever will be. Captain America? Oh my god. Like, great performances all around. I just love how everyone has a chance to shine. Both the major players and the Little League players. Everyone is given a chance to shine here. And it feels like a comic book film that almost feels like we are picking up we're picking up at the bleakest part of a war. That's how I've always viewed the opening bit. Overall, this film just is, for me, what I think all comic book films should be held standards to. Their characters, the cinematography, the special effects, the story, the action sequences, the grand scale, the outlandishness. If you want a superhero film where others have to be held to a higher standard, it comes from this installment. And honestly, it's just a wow factor for me. This film is worth all the praise and all the enjoyment that fans get out of it. Will the film probably top this film? I don't know. It definitely seems like a possibility. But even with that said, you can still get a lot of enjoyment out of this film, and I don't think you can't. I haven't heard anyone who didn't get enjoyment out of this film. This film is worth the watch to sit down, turn on, and just watch this masterpiece unfold. And that's why I crown Avengers Endgame #1. Also, Thanos is one of the most unique MCU villains. He's a person who is a monster, but he has a side that makes us sympathetic with him. He's just someone that's misunderstood, and he's someone that is definitely someone that, is just, a powerful being who doesn't back down, and commands presence. Josh Brolin commands presence in the role. And Thanos is, for many people, the greatest comic book villain in films. And I can't disagree. Is he my favorite? Well, who knows. I might get down the list doing my top 10 comic book villains. But until then, this one definitely holds the gold standard for all superhero films. And there we have it. Those were top 10 comic book movies. Do you agree with this list? Do you have your own personal top 10? What would you have included in your list? Please get down to the comments and put your own personal top 10s. I would love to hear from you. But until next time, this has been the Steven Hour. And ladies and gentlemen, so long for now.